Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz coming at you live from the Golan for Israel 365 News. We're here today with the guest we've had a few times, and I keep inviting her back just because these people do the most amazing work. They are bringing Geulah. They are saving Israel, saving the biblical heartland. This is Naomi Kahn. She's the director of the International Division of Regavim. Regavim is an organization, they fight for the Jewish rights in Judea and Samaria. And this episode, we're going to be talking about how this fight for Jewish rights in Judea and Samaria is actually saving the environment, which is something everyone should be able to get behind. Regavim's efforts usually are to stop illegal building in areas that there shouldn't be any building. Palestinians building where they shouldn't be building, where they don't have the authority, and it shouldn't be any construction there. And this time it also is saving the environment. And since tomorrow is the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which is the New Year of the Trees, we thought this would be especially poignant. So hi, Naomi.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Thank you for coming back. This is so important. I am so pleased to hear about what you're doing. So tell me about Regavim and the environment.
So I'm going to take a step back and just tell you about Regavim and Tu B'Shvat. Every year on Tu B'Shvat, we celebrate the founding of Regavim. No better day to do it. The whole idea of Tu B'Shvat, as we see that the rebirth of nature, it's essentially the beginning of the year for tithes, for the fruits of the trees, and that's really what Regavim is all about. The most basic, down to earth, literally connection to the land of Israel.
Sure, it's all about love of the land.
That's correct. So we are now, this year, we're celebrating our 15th anniversary. This Tu B'Shvat is the 15th anniversary of the founding of Regavim, 15 years of nonstop activity on a multiplicity of fronts, really, to try to protect the land of Israel. So on Tu B'Shvat every year, we release our annual report, all the things that were on our agenda this past year, a survey of some of our successes, and looking forward, the agenda for the following year. So anyone who's interested in seeing really what we've been up to and what we hope to be up to, tomorrow our report is released. And tomorrow we're also launching our brand new, all new website. Same address as before, regavim.org, but it's an all new website, which will be launched on Tu B'Shvat. And there you'll be able to see our new annual survey of 2020 and see some of the things on our agenda for the year ahead. Some of the things we're going to discuss, hopefully in the next few minutes, are covered there, and some of them are completely new. So that's Regavim and Tu B'Shvat. Regavim and the environment, it's a natural pairing, really. We try to protect the land of Israel, and we do that by first and foremost being out in the field, all through the land of Israel every day, not only in Judea and Samaria, but all through the land of Israel. And so, sorry, that's an automatic, just to keep the glare out. So what we find out in the field is not only illegal construction, but all sorts of environmental abuse, all sorts of things that are taking advantage of the fact that Israeli law is not enforced in Judea and Samaria, and taking advantage of the fact that the state of Israel has not committed itself by enforcing Israeli law, by extending Israeli law over what was once the Green Line and is now pretty much non-existent. So,
if I may, I want to emphasize that even though most of my listeners and most Israelis consider Judea and Samaria to be an integral part of Israel, as it was the biblical heartland, it is technically under military authority, what they call the Kogat. And so therefore, a lot of basic things that would be municipal or governmental agencies just don't apply. This comes out horribly for archaeology, which gets destroyed, and even for environment. I've heard of spontaneous garbage dumps being put up And that's just, I mean, unfortunately. And if we don't have boots on the ground and eyes in the field like we get from Regavim, these things are just go forward until someone screams. And even then.
That's exactly the problem. When people talk about a lack of sovereignty or applying or not applying sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, what they don't realize is that because Israel has failed to extend sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, the law that is enforced there, the law that the state of Israel itself enforces there, is a combination of Jordanian law and Ottoman land law. And that creates some outrageous violations of people's rights. First of all, the rights.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have your images ready. If you just want to cue me on when you want me to put up the images, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. I'll give you some background first. So some of the violations of aside from the violation of our national rights, the rights of the Jewish people to its the heartland of its ancestral homeland, there's also egregious violations of personal rights that are an outgrowth of this failure to extend Israeli sovereignty to these areas. So, for example, we went to court to petition that an absolutely racist law be struck from the books. At the moment, there's a law that was created by the Jordanians when they were illegally occupying Judea and Samaria for 19 years, between 1948 and 1967. This law prohibits the sale of land in Judea and Samaria to Jews. This is
last week we had Dan Loria on, and Dan Loria, who through his organization, the Teret Kohanim, they repurchase properties that once belonged to Jews, and they work so hard because it's capital punishment. Palestinians who sell their land or sell their property to Jews are literally tortured and sometimes even killed for doing so. And it's not good for us, and it's not good for them.
But the thing is, what you're talking about, and the thing that Dan Luria comes up against all the time, is the Palestinian Authorities law. What I'm talking about is law that is enforced by the state of Israel in the year 2021 that prohibits Jews from buying property in Judea and Samaria. This is still on the book, still enforced.
I did not know that at all.
Absolutely the case. So, for example, in all of these places, what you will have, where I'm sitting right now, what you see here, I live in a place called Givat Ze'ev. This is in Judea and Samaria. It's actually in the Binyamin region. It is forbidden for Jews to purchase, individual Jews to purchase property, privately owned property in Judea and Samaria. Therefore, I cannot purchase this land. What the state of Israel did was they fiddled around with the Jordanian laws, which are clearly racist and anachronistic and would not be allowed to exist anywhere else in the world. And they fiddled around with it in such a way that would allow corporations to purchase land. So all of the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, the land, when it is owned privately, is actually purchased by a corporation. This is something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And in the state of Israel, rather than facing up to this and striking down a clearly racist and discriminatory law, is working around it. Enough. We have to behave like a sovereign country in our own homeland. It's time to strike these laws down. There are other anomalies that are created by Israel's failure to enforce the law. You can read much more about all of those on our website, on our Facebook page. But what I want to go back to something that you mentioned, and that is the fact that we're under military rule here, essentially. So the civil administration is responsible for enforcing the law throughout Judea and Samaria. So things like the Israel Antiquities Authority or the Israel Ministry of Environment or Environmental Protection, none of those operate in Judea and Samaria. And the civil administration is supposed to perform all of those tasks in this area. Now, you mentioned archaeology, and this is something that we've been very, very involved in. We are trying to battle the Palestinian Authorities' concerted, systematic program of erasing Jewish history from the ground in Judea and Samaria. And the civil administration that is supposed to be protecting these hundreds of priceless World Heritage sites that are of crucial importance. They bear testimony to Jewish history going back thousands of years. The Palestinian Authority is systematically erasing them, destroying them. The civil administration has altogether three people in charge of covering all of the archaeological sites in Judea and Samaria altogether. One for all of Judea, one for all of Samaria, and another for the Jordan Valley. It's ludicrous. It's impossible. They can't possibly be there even if they want to. This is one of the most densely populated areas in terms of archaeological sites in the world. And there are only three people in charge.
And if you don't look out for it, it's just priceless antiquities sitting out in the field for anyone to take, for anyone to destroy. That garbage dump I mentioned was on top of an archaeological site. You've shown us photos, just parking lots paved that no cars sit on. Correct. They were paved just to hide the archaeology. Stuff like that goes on all the time, unfortunately.
So, unfortunately, it's a massive problem. We've been addressing it for several years. Another problem, another systematic program that takes advantage of what we've discussed, of the fact that Ottoman land law is still in force here, is what has now become known as the Palestinian Authority's Roots Program. In Arabic, it's called Juthur, which means roots. Ottoman land law gives you rights to a piece of property, no matter how you acquired that property. If you stole it, if you killed the owner, if you poached it, if you borrowed it and won't give it back, if you can prove that you have used a piece of property for agricultural purposes for a certain amount of time, you have rights to it. That is the anachronism of Ottoman land law. The Palestinian Authority knows full well that this is a fabulous loophole and has charged in, and over the past several years has used this loophole to take hold of thousands of dunams of land, state land, Israeli state land, in Area C, in Judea and Samaria, in the areas under full Israeli control. They strategically locate areas that they want to take over and simply go out and plant trees there. If nobody objects and no one does anything about it, the land becomes theirs. The civil administration has taken over the last few years, has simply taken a pencil to the maps of jurisdiction in Judea and Samaria, and places where the Palestinian Authority has focused and planted and cultivated all sorts of agricultural projects. They are now no longer in Area C. They've been moved to Areas A or B. So, Josh, you can show...
What is stopping someone? Let me just ask you a question first. What is stopping someone from protesting? What is involved in the protest process? I mean, you said that if no one protests it goes into their control. But what is stopping you as an organization or me as an individual from protesting these lands acquisition?
There's nothing stopping us, which is why Regavim does what it does. The only thing that needs to be done is you need to report it. You need to report it to the civil administration, which is the law enforcement body responsible. And that's what we do when we find them. The problem is that the civil administration has been hiding for years behind what it calls enforcement priorities. When we complain about activity carried out in this way by the Palestinian Authority, the civil administration responds to us with a set answer almost every time. Thank you for your report. We will investigate and enforce when necessary according to pre-established enforcement priorities. So what are those enforcement priorities? Well, first and foremost, it's construction on someone's private property. After that, construction on on public property, on state land. After that, it's going down the list through a whole different list of permutations of illegal activity. And the very last enforcement priority on the entire list is agricultural work on state land. So they'll get around to it when they get around to it. The problem is that Ottoman law states clearly that this is time sensitive. If a piece of land has been used for a certain amount of time, you can't enforce the law anymore, and the person who's done the planting has rights. So saying that they'll put it on their list of priorities for enforcement and get around to it maybe in 10 years is the same thing as saying we have no intention of doing anything, and this land is lost to the Jewish people permanently.
You know, I lived in Gush Etzion for many years, and it's a known thing that as soon as we put up a settlement, as soon as we put up a community, if we put a fence around it, the Arabs would come and plant right up to the fence. And I actually didn't know these laws that you're telling me about, which means they're saying up until the fence is ours. When we put up a fence for security, which is something we absolutely needed, that was all of a sudden saying, okay, now you've told us not where you live, you've told us where you cannot live because it's ours now. And this was a known thing.
Yes. So it's even worse than that, because in areas that were completely barren, that remain completely barren, the Palestinian Authority, using massive European funding, has sent people out to plant things. Doesn't matter what, things that grow quickly. So they grow mustard seed, and they grow elama kchila, all kinds of things that are not indigenous, but their advantage is that they grow very, very quickly to make it appear that they've been there for a very long time. And in this way, they're taking control of strategic points. So when they build right up to the fence of a Jewish community, they don't do that accidentally. And they don't do it because it's easier to steal water from the Jewish community than it is to pipe in their own water, which is true. They do it in order to lay claim to the land just outside the fence so that that community has nowhere to grow. They're claiming that land to contain the Jewish communities. They build they plant alongside highways. They plant in between Jewish communities in order to cut off their contiguity and their access. And the European Union actually encourages and pays for all of this, lays down infrastructure, water, electricity, all of these things. Some of the images that you can put up now. First, there's a map.
Wait, I have another question.
Yes.
What is being done to retract this archaic and immoral law of the Ottoman Turks and the Jordanians?
What is being done? Regavim keeps going to court. We're suing the government. We're suing.
God bless you.
Is there anyone in the government that's taking this on as something in order to try to change it legislatively?
There's a problem. The problem is that we have we're in between governments. We're in between governments for too long. There are many things about this that don't have to be full sovereignty or lack of sovereignty. There are stages in the middle that the state of Israel has not taken advantage of. So, for example, one of the big problems in Judea and Samaria that is related to this question of sovereignty, not sovereignty, whose laws will be applied there, one of the issues is that the state of Israel, decades ago, stopped registering land because they were afraid that it would be construed as an act of sovereignty. The registry of land in Judea and Samaria that had been begun in the Ottoman period and was continued during the British Mandate period, and then again by the Jordanians, actual registration of plots of land according to the cadastre, that is the internationally accepted system of gridding land on a map. The state of Israel has refrained from continuing and completing that process for 53 years, longer actually. Simply because they're afraid. The government of Israel has been afraid that this would cause international backlash. It would be construed as an act of sovereignty. Now that's ridiculous. The British Mandate knew full well that they were here temporarily. They had no interest in being sovereign here. They were here as caretakers. But the first thing they did in order to avoid chaos and constant conflict over who owns what piece of land was to continue the process of registration of the land. And the state of Israel hasn't done so. So we are calling for the state of Israel to do so. There are members of Knesset who are involved in this the civil administration itself agrees, and the Attorney General agrees. Everyone agrees that this is a necessary process and it must go forward. Otherwise, we will have not only chaos, but a violation of personal ownership rights, both of Jews and of non-Jews. At a certain point, you have to be able to say who owns what. Otherwise, you have chaos and constant conflict. So there are members of Knesset who have been involved in this and who are trying to push it forward. Unfortunately, right now, due to the political environment, nothing's really moving, but this must move forward. And unfortunately, what we found, and we recently participated in a Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee meeting, a hearing about this issue. I can actually, it's all in Hebrew, so I didn't attach it today. But members of Knesset who heard what is and is not happening out in the field were shocked beyond words. The Palestinian Authority, not the State of Israel, the Palestinian Authority is carrying out a full land survey and registration process. They have a ministry for land regulation and registration. They are registering land in Area C. And if you go out in Gush Etzion any day of the week now, anywhere in Gush Etzion, Drom Har Hebron, and you walk around, just look, you'll see surveying teams with equipment. They are Palestinian Authority surveying teams, and they are registering the land. Over 600 employees of the Palestinian Authority are involved full-time in the question of land registry in Judea.
The Palestinian Authority is not a country, but they're surveying the land, and us as a sovereign nation.
And do you know how many people in the state of Israel are actually involved in the entire issue of land registration in Judea and Samaria? Less than 25. And this is not my data. This is the civil administration in the Knesset hearing last month. They said the situation is critical. Now you say, okay, so the Palestinian Authority is registering land. Who cares? They can register anything they want. Well, when there is no other registry to rebut their claims of ownership and something comes to court, that's the only documentation there is. That's what's going to be accepted, not only internationally, but in Israeli courts. As a matter of fact, Palestinian land registry records have already been introduced as evidence in Israel's Supreme Court. Rather than the Supreme Court of Israel throwing the whole notion out the window, it set it aside for now.
So if the Palestinian Authority as a non-entity, as a non-nation can do that, what is stopping a private organization from doing the exact same thing and creating their own registry that could be submitted to a court as well?
Because it has no legal standing.
Neither does the Palestinian Authority.
The Palestinian Authority is considered a state by many, many countries in the world and has legal standing in the United Nations. And
not in the courts of Israel.
In the International Criminal Court in Hague, we don't have standing as a state, but the Palestinian Authority does. That's how absurd it's getting.
Yes and no, but the point of the matter is that every day that goes by when the state of Israel refuses to behave in a responsible manner creates further and further chaos, and we lose our grip on the heartland of the land of Israel.
So let's show some pictures. We have.
I was going to say, if I don't see the pictures, I'm going to lose my mind. By the way, I just want to add. I'm like, really, I'm going crazy here. I just want to add, Naomi, that hearing about the Palestinians planting trees literally to steal land, it seems to me like a perversion of the Jewish mitzvah of planting trees out of the love of land and the love of redemption.
It is a perversion, and the irony isn't lost, not on us and not on the Palestinian Authority. I don't know, Josh, if you can locate the images of the last 48 hours. There have
let's see pictures.
Massive.
Do you know what it's called? You're talking about the map?
Tu B'Shvat, all sorts of Tu B'Shvat images.
Okay, so we have this 200 olive tree.
2,000 olive trees were recently planted just outside of, you can scroll through those images, just outside of Rosh Ha'ain.
I want to cry.
This is the Palestinian Authority's Roots program in action. Thousands of trees purchased with European money are being planted in strategic areas. These particular images from the last 48 hours are from IDF firing zones. This is state land, just along the security barrier, right near the city of Rosh Ha'ain, which is in the center of the country, between Rosh Ha'ain and Dir Balut.
Wouldn't it be horrible if they got hurt in those firing zones?
The IDF has scrupulously protected civilians in firing zones. The result of that is what you see now: an entire city in firing zones 917 and 918 in the southern Hebron area, where the IDF gradually pulled back further and further in order to avoid harming civilians. And now they've completely abandoned those firing zones, and there's a full Arab city right there on the spot with thousands of permanent structures. The map you're looking at right now is a map that we created and published in 2017. It's already, unfortunately, sadly out of date. It records the agricultural activity and this illegal activity that we identified as supporting this agricultural annexation by the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria. This is already going back over 3 years ago. Thousands of dunams, thousands of acres have been overtaken by this agricultural use loophole in the law that Israel continues to enforce in these areas. Thousands of dunams of land. But not only in quantity is this a problem, it's the actual strategic quality, because the Palestinian Authority targets spaces. You'll notice at the bottom of the image where all those orange dots are, those are created in order to connect Arab population centers of areas A and B. So they're trying to take control of the land and create a large block there through simply planting trees. And unfortunately, it's working. Over the last 48 hours, this is another aspect of the problem. This is illegal construction inside an Israeli nature reserve in the north of the country, not Judea and Samaria, but in the Carmel region. Here, you can't blame the civil administration. The state of Israel is responsible. And these palatial residences, these are residences, I remind you, not hotels, were built right smack in the heart of the Carmel Nature Reserve. And they're still there. We've been petitioning against them for years.
These are the houses of the poor Palestinian people, correct?
Correct. Well, these are Israeli Arabs.
I was saying that.
And they are full citizens of the state of Israel with full rights. Unfortunately, full rights doesn't seem to translate into full responsibilities.
And what is this?
What we are calling for in Regavim is not only full rights, but also full responsibilities, equal and universal enforcement of the law. What you're looking at here is a new mosque that is being built on the ruins of the Tzreidah fortress just outside of Peduel in Samaria. This construction has started only a couple of weeks ago. The mosque is going up at lightning speed, and it has pretty much obliterated the remains of the Tzreidah of the Tzreidah fortress. The amazing thing about that new mosque is that the roads that were used to access that spot were paid for by the United Nations. The United Nations program to help create quote unquote agricultural access roads for the farmers of the Kfar nearby, the Arab village of Kfar Adik. They created a whole system of agricultural roads, quote unquote, and all along those roads, paid for, paved, and electrical lines, etc., paid for by the United Nations, are now the basis for a whole new neighborhood. And the mosque that you just saw is to service that whole new neighborhood. It is creating a stranglehold around the Jewish community of Peduel. It is completely illegal, and the state of Israel has taken no action against it. we have petitioned the Supreme Court. We have sent warning letters to the representative of the United Nations here in Israel. We will not let go on this, but it's a process of years. And every time the court issues a temporary injunction to halt construction at a site like this, the other side, as you can imagine, is not all that impressed, because they know very well that it's not at the top of the enforcement priorities for the civil administration.
So what can individuals do to stop this outrageous situation? What can Israelis do, and what can people that are outside of Israel do?
First thing they can do is we need to create public pressure. And now that elections are coming, Israeli citizens can certainly help us pressure politicians who are running, claiming to be right-wing and claiming to be in favor of Israel's national rights in these areas. We are placing pressure on them. We are actually taking them out to the field to see what is happening. We are trying to create enough pressure to force the civil administration. We actually just did. We petitioned the Supreme Court. We had a Freedom of Information petition to force the civil administration to explain its enforcement priorities. They simply have been using that phrase for years and not telling anyone what their enforcement priorities are. So at least we got that information. We got it out in the public. We got it under the noses of ministers and members of Knesset, and onto the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee table to be considered, and to call them to task for not actually doing what they say they are supposed to be doing according to enforcement priorities.
Does Regavim send out a questionnaire to potential candidates, asking them their opinions on these kind of topics, so we can know who we should be supporting?
We do more than that. We actually host a panel. We have done in the past few election cycles. Unfortunately, they're so fast and furious these days that it's hard for us to keep up. But we run a panel in which we invite members of Knesset or potential members of Knesset to come and express themselves on issues that have to do with all of the things on Regavim's agenda. That includes sovereignty, enforcement of the law, judicial reform, land regulation, all sorts of things, the place of the civil administration in this entire thing. So yes, we do run a panel to be updated on when that's going to happen this year. Unfortunately, it will happen by Zoom, I assume. So you have to follow our Facebook or website to see when that will happen. I'll also send you wonderful people at I365 notification about when that panel will happen. If and when, we're scrambling to get it together with all of the Corona
Is there any connection between what you're doing and the sovereignty movement of Nadia Matar and those great people out there in Gush Etzion?
We are very close to Nadia Matar and Yehudit Katzover. We work together. We are also members of various forums. We try to pool our resources and our efforts. Each of us has a different area of expertise. But Regavim essentially is the only fieldwork-based organization that's trying to prevent the erosion of Israeli sovereignty as it is now, and to create solutions all through Israel, not only in Judea and Samaria. We're very, very active in the Negev. If you look at our Facebook page, you'll see over the past few weeks the tragic, I would say, collapse of the Negev into lawlessness and chaos. It's something we've been working on for almost 15 years. We have created a plan. Parts of it are actually being implemented by the government, but there's a lot of work to do and much, much further to go. We have a vision for how the sovereignty of the state of Israel has to be expressed everywhere in the country, not only in Judea and Samaria, but in the south, in the north. For example, those illegal structures that you saw in the nature reserve, the north of Israel is covered in illegal construction. As a matter of fact, we have a petition at the Supreme Court right now about illegal construction that is completely obstructing the national infrastructure corridor that is supposed to be the area through which all of the advanced infrastructure can serve the entire north of the country. That includes fiber optic cables, it includes electrical lines, it includes all the things that Israel's northern communities need to flourish. And illegal construction just outside of Kalansawa and outside of Tira and all along Route 6 are obstructing them. Nobody stopped people from just building houses right in the middle of the, or storerooms or farms or whatever they want, right on the national infrastructure corridor.
You know, Naomi, I'm an old school hippie. I work very hard at not being angry at anyone. I really do. And I mean, seeing olive trees in the plastic bags ready to plant is something, I mean, it brings back warm memories for me. I can still feel what it's like to bring a box cutter up, cut open the plastic, and just, I mean, it's so much easier to push the dirt in than it was to dig the hole. And I mean, these are all things I did and remember and cherish. And now I'm seeing these lovely olive trees weaponized. They're being used as to steal. And I mean, the mosque is actually, I can see that someone put some love into the building. It's not just a cinder block building. They're making it beautiful. I don't, God forbid, hate Muslims. I don't hate Arabs. I just, if you're going to be my neighbor, not this way, not like this. We both have to live.
I want to point something out before we go any further. And I think that all of your viewers should take a moment and just look at this study. It's a map, actually. You can see it on our website. We did a comprehensive study. Two of the main claims to explain all of this illegal activity by the Palestinian Authority in areas A and B. There are two main claims. Number one is that they have nowhere to go. They have to build. They have to live. So they have to build. And number two, a corollary to that is that because the civil administration does not give enough building permits in Area C to the Palestinians, they have to build illegally. So we did a study. We checked out two things. Number one, we petitioned the civil administration to see how many building permits they actually give. And number two, even before that, we did a study using purchased satellite imagery of areas A and B. How much space really is there? Correct. You can see it, maps and position papers. You'll have to scroll down. But we did a very careful analysis of how much space is available in areas A and B. Now, I remind you that in areas A and B, the Palestinian Authority is in control and has absolutely no need for Israeli permits of any kind. So what's the situation there? Have they really maxed out all of the area that they have at their disposal, and they therefore have to build in Area C and therefore have to build illegally? Well, guess what? Over 60% of land reserves in areas A and B under full Palestinian jurisdiction are empty. They have plenty of place to build. They don't need to build in Area C. They certainly don't need to build illegally. And the civil administration does give building permits. Every 2 weeks, almost every 2 weeks on average, the High Planning Commission of the civil administration meets to consider building plans that have been submitted for permit. There are plenty of them. Why are the percentages so low of construction in areas A and B? The Palestinian Authority has not invested any of its resources in developing the areas under its control. 10 years ago, this Palestinian Authority published the Fayyad Plan for the creation of a Palestinian state in Area C. All of the construction is political. And that is why 60% of land reserves in A and B are empty, and all of their resources are poured into illegal construction in order to take control of Area C. Now, the percentages of permits that are granted by the civil administration for Palestinian construction in Area C are indeed very low. And do you know why that is? Because the Palestinian Authority has unlimited funding from Europeans, and they clog the system with thousands of building permit requests. Most of them are ridiculous. If you submit, you, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, you, Josh Wanda, you submit a building permit request to the civil administration that you want to build a a 450-meter home in the middle of the highway, do you think it would get approval? Probably not. If you submit a building proposal that you want to build 7 housing units for your extended family on someone else's property, do you think it would be approved? Probably not. So they flood the courts and the Civil Administration Planning Commission with
And there's no penalty, there's no consequences to these frivolous
none whatsoever. None whatsoever. And if there were, if it was only money, it wouldn't make a difference because they have unlimited funds. European governments and the European Union itself fund all of these permit requests and just to make Israel look bad. That is called lawfare. That is using Israel's legal system against itself. And so all the time you'll hear in the press the percentage of building permits that have actually been granted for Palestinian construction in Area C is minuscule. Well, indeed it is, because the percentage of ridiculous permit requests that are, and the sheer volume of ridiculous permit requests that are submitted every year is astronomical. So the percentage that are actually feasible and are actually granted permission is very small. So it's a game. You have to know what the numbers mean when you see numbers. And that's what we try to do. We try to make sense and we try to deal in fact. We too do not hate. We don't want to hate. We don't want conflict. We want law so that we can move forward peacefully for a better future for everyone here. And that's why we believe the land registration and regulation process has to go forward to protect everyone's rights. There are private Arab owners of land whose rights are being trampled. There are private owners of land on both sides who have no rights because there's no way to determine who owns what. I'll give you just a little tidbit. The same law that prohibits Jews from purchasing land in Judea and Samaria as individuals also prohibits women from inheriting or purchasing land. Not just Jewish women, Arab women as well.
Israeli law?
It's Jordanian law that is still in force. It's still enforced by the courts of Israel. And that is the ridiculous situation that we are trying to put an end to. It's time.
And all the self-claimed feminist members of Knesset, they're not aware of this or not willing to deal with it?
Mom, they most likely aren't aware of it, which is why Regavim does what it does. We try to make people aware of these things that are very often brushed under the carpet. People don't realize that that Jews are discriminated against by the law more here than they are anywhere else, almost anywhere else in the world. And that's a ridiculous situation. It's time for that to stop. A racist law of this kind would not be allowed to stand on the books anywhere else in the world. There's only one other place that it does exist, and that is Jordan, also created by the League of Nations and the United Nations as a Judenrein country. It's time for this to end in Israel, in the land of Israel, in the heartland of the Jewish homeland. It's enough. So we're working on that and on many other things. Our connection to the land brings us to deal with very, very many challenges at the same time. So anyone who's interested in finding out more about the range of things that we do, I invite you tomorrow. Our spanking new website will be up on the air and it will look beautiful. So you can have a look, and hopefully our annual report will feature very, very prominently there. But yeah, there are a lot of challenges. So the last thought that I'll leave you with, as you asked, what people can do, help us, support us, follow us, share our materials, help spread the word, and if you can, donate. It will help us bring more cases to court. It will help us get more people out on the ground, eyes, ears, and help us coordinate our efforts better in order to protect the land of Israel better.
So Naomi, every time you come, every time you speak to us, I learn so much. Not all of it is so nice for me. It's difficult for me to accept. Last time you were talking about how the Palestinian Authority was using schools, weaponizing them, putting the kids in danger, giving them lesser education just in order to grab strategic pieces of land. Here, my beautiful memories of planting trees is now a little bit sullied. God willing, maybe I'll go out and plant a tree to get over it.
That's a great idea. That is a great idea.
Yeah, measure for measure. I can't thank you enough. Like I said, I'm learning things that I thought I was an expert on. I'm learning more. I really appreciate your time, and God bless you for the amazing stuff you do.
Thank you. Let me just add one more thing. If you choose to invite me back again, I promise next time I'm going to come with good news. I'm going to come with some of our successes. I'm not going to depress everybody every time I come on. Next time we're going to have a full positive list of the things that we've managed to change out on the ground, because we do have some impressive successes to discuss.
I thank God you do, or we wouldn't be here. I'm going to hold you to that. I'm absolutely going to hold you to that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for people coming and listening. It's so important to know about this stuff. It's so important to spread the knowledge, to spread the word. Thank you for joining us. We've had a great time. Blessings coming out from Israel. Be blessed, y'all.